Tonight on Let It Rip, a hectic week on the political front, and two big-name politicians vying for your vote have a lot to say. Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin and former Congressman Mike Rogers both trying to take over for Senator Debbie Stabenow, stopping by our Let It Rip stage. New tariffs on China that could raise electric vehicle prices for you, and the horrors of war in Israel sparking protests on college campuses here in the U.S. The two candidates weighing in on if the students are right in exercising their right to protest, and what Israel's endgame could be. That is coming up on Let It Rip. Good evening and welcome to Let It Rip. Congresswoman Slotkin and former Congressman Mike Rogers both bring unique perspectives to these stories. Rogers was an FBI special agent and chaired the House Intelligence Committee. And Congresswoman Slotkin was an intelligence analyst at the CIA and serves on the House Armed Services Committee. Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin joins us now on Let It Rip tonight to talk about the news that everybody is talking about across the world, across the country. The tariffs on specifically these EVs in China. It's a move designed to bolster U.S. jobs and manufacturing. Ms. Slotkin, do you think that that will be accomplished with these tariffs?
Well, look, there was a tariffs on a bunch of things, EVs, but aluminum, things like masks and syringes. I mean, a sort of list of things that were that had tariffs put on them. And the goal is to basically say we're not going to let the Chinese government flood the United States market with these goods. They're subsidized goods. They undersell our own companies, our own workers, and take jobs away from us. And so we put a sort of a shot across the bow here that we're not going to take that by putting these tariffs on. And I think it's after 30 years of outsourcing in a very serious way. We all had our come to Jesus during COVID, where we realized our supply chains were way overinvested in places like China. And this was something that was pushing back and saying we're not going to allow you to dump particularly your new vehicles in our market the way they've dumped them in Europe and in Mexico. They're now almost 30% of market share in Europe with these Chinese connected vehicles. So I think it was an important sort of moment to push back on the Chinese government dumping of their products in our marketplace.
Seemingly, this is something that Donald Trump and President Biden would agree on in many ways. Of course, President Biden continued the tariffs that were in effect at 25% that Trump put in effect. But Trump says we should go a step further here and further these tariffs on other vehicles as well. Do you think that that's something that should be done?
Well, honestly, I think that there's a bigger picture here, which is the national security implications of a Chinese connected vehicle coming into the United States, being able to collect motion data, video, LiDAR, all the important information about our military bases, our major infrastructure. I don't want these things here for national security reasons as a former CIA officer and Pentagon official. But I do think we need to be more thoughtful about whether we just allow these goods to come into our marketplace, these or others. So I'm open to a bigger conversation on this. I think this was just kind of a continuation, like you said, of what's started certainly under the Trump administration. Are
you afraid that China will try to evade this by somehow perhaps channeling some of their goods over to Mexico, have them made there and then brought into the U.S.?
Yeah, there's some less than perfect things about tariffs in general, and that's why I'm looking at sort of interesting national security levers we can pull. Because if China, we know that they're sniffing around Mexico and looking to set up factories in Mexico. Sure. We don't want to let them just put those companies there as shell companies, send their vehicles over the border. So we're looking at national security ways we can put up hurdles and stop that from happening. So there's no perfect one policy. It's just a matter of when do you start and say we're not going to allow them cheating on the international system and we're not going to allow them to dump their vehicles into our economy.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right here in the U.S. at college campuses, including at the University of Michigan, of course. These Palestinian, Free Palestine protesters. What is your message to Arab Americans out there and Jewish Americans who are your constituents about how we can find a way to protest without breaching decency and going past that?
Yeah, I think particularly on campuses across the country in places like Columbia and GW, and there just has been sort of a lack of leadership on that line between peaceful protest, freedom of speech, and then intimidation, threats of violence, use of violent imagery. And I think the line on campus where universities have to keep students safe is if there's any use of violent imagery, any incitement of violence, any threats of violence, that shouldn't be allowed on campus. You want to protest and be as critical of the Israeli government as you want, you can do that, but you can't threaten violence. And overnight, we had a number of the U of M regents, were targeted at home. People went to their homes at 4:30 in the morning, knocked on their doors, put demands up, wearing masked faces. That's meant to intimidate, and I don't support that. We shouldn't support that. So there is a line. We just need people to vigilantly stay on the right side of it.
Congresswoman, we have about 30 seconds left, but Benjamin Netanyahu, what does he do now? How does this end? Is this an insurgency? What are we looking at here?
The United States, in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen a version of this movie. I served 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military, and so I saw this up close. You need to have a clear military strategy, and then you need to have a day-after strategy. And those are the things that we need to hear from the Israelis and understand from the Israelis as this goes forward. We know what it's like to be bogged down.
Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, thanks for your time tonight.
You bet.
Getting both sides tonight, here's what former Congressman Mike Rogers had to say about these issues. Mike Rogers, good to see you. Thanks for joining us here today.
Hey, Rupe, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we have some important stuff to get to here on Let It Rip tonight. EVs, you're hearing this president take a stance with these tariffs against China when it comes to the Seagull, this car that costs close to $12,000. Is this going to put a dent into China's effort to try to get into the U.S. with this vehicle?
There is one solution to this, Rupe, and that is to stop the EV mandate. By 2030 to 2032, 1 car out of 3 is going to be a gas-operated vehicle, which means pickup trucks and SUVs are going to be outrageously expensive. It's not just this. I mean, yes, the Chinese are trying to take advantage of it. And why? Because they're mandated. We have to buy this product. 85% of everything processed into an electric vehicle happens in China. And so even if they put tariffs on those cars, 85% of the internal operation of that electric vehicle gets processed in China.
But
that's
Mike,
bad for Michigan, bad for jobs. This is really, and it's bad for families, by the way, and it's not that great for the environment. We shouldn't be doing this.
Well, and talk about the environment for a moment, because, it's a shame that the environment has become completely political, or we can't talk about it without it becoming a red or a blue issue. But one of the reasons that many people want this as a thing by 2030 is to cut down on emissions. We know that those gas-guzzling cars, they do damage to the environment. Are you concerned about that at all?
So there's a better way to get here. 2 things. Remember, China is now going to build, in order to meet the electric vehicle energy demands, to build them 100 new coal-fired plants. Not good for the environment. 500 pounds of critical minerals, Rupe, makes 1 all-electric vehicle. Remember, 85% of that has to be processed in China. And so now those are 2 problems. And it makes 1 electric vehicle that takes 4 tons of carbon out of the air. If we were to use that for hybrids, it made that same 500 pounds, 90 hybrid vehicles that takes 140 tons of carbon out of the air. And you don't have to plug it in, and you keep UAW jobs right here in Michigan. So it's not, there are better ways to accomplish what they want. I don't, for the life of me, understand their chest thumping on it has to be an EV. Remember, if you're a mom and you have 3 kids and you're trying to get them around town, an EV does not work for your family. You're not going to stop in the middle of the day for 2 hours to try to charge up when you've got softball at one end of town and basketball at the other. Well, it just doesn't work.
And
the market works.
All right, Mike, I want to talk to you about these college protests that are happening here. What's your message both to the Jewish students but also to the Arab American students who are frustrated with the way things are going overseas?
First of all, violence and death threats, no place in American society. No Jewish student should be afraid to leave their dorm room because they're going to get harassed or worse or have some violent behavior. The folks who are chanting death to Israel, from the river to the sea, is talking about the extermination of all Jewish people in Israel. Wrong. It's absolutely wrong. As a matter of fact, if you're a Fordham student here and you're involved in those types of protests, your student visa should be you revoked and you should go home. There's no place for that on college campuses. It looks a lot more like 1938 on college campuses than it does in 2024 when it comes to anti-Semitism. That has to stop. Where we can get unified is give the hostages back. You know, we could get a ceasefire tomorrow if the Hamas terrorist group would give the hostages back. Remember, they've been trapped in these tunnels, and which is hardly, you can't hardly argue they've been treated well, you know, for the entirety of this since October 7th. That's wrong. Give the hostages back. You could probably get a ceasefire over that, and I think the U.S. would support that. And then we unify about helping the Palestinian people try to rebuild their lives subsequent to this really horrific terrorist attack on October 7th.
We only have like 10 seconds left. Benjamin Netanyahu, he needs to slow his roll when it comes to the way he's being in terms of his aggression?
He is not going to be the prime minister for peace after this is over. I'm very confident of that. I do think they have to dismantle Hamas, the terrorist organizations. There's 3 brigades, is my understanding, of trained terrorist fighters. They need to be degraded and dismantled, and the hostages need to come home. Then you have a conversation, and it won't be Netanyahu going forward. I'm fairly confident.
All right, Mike Rogers, we thank you so much for your time here today on Let It Rip.
Hey, thanks, Ruth.
And so a lot to unpack there, especially on the EV front. Our all-star panel weighs in when we come back on Let It Rip. Back now on Let It Rip, joining us now to unpack that, what Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin and former Congressman Mike Rogers had to say, Michigan Rising Executive Director Abby Mitch, and Autoline's John McElroy, Fox 2 anchor and attorney Charlie Langton here with us as well. And so let's get into this right now. President Biden is saying, hey, let's up those tariffs from 25 to 100%. And he's kind of following, in many ways, from the Trump playbook of the tariffs against China. John McElroy, this is a president who, when Trump was in office, kind of snubbed at the tariffs against China and questioned Trump's tariffs, and now he's amping the very ones up. Is that hypocrisy, or is that just business as usual?
Look, it's politics in a presidential election year. There's great bipartisan support to show that you're as tough as possible on China. And that's what these tariffs are about. They're blocking electric cars. I thought at first it was all Chinese-made cars, but no, it's only electric ones. There's only one company selling electric cars made in China in the United States right now. That's a brand called Polestar. Most people have never even heard of it. It's an offshoot of Volvo. I don't even think it's going to survive. So we don't really need protection from Chinese electric cars right now because they're just not here yet. This is kind of a preemptive move, but it's definitely part of the politics of an election year.
Abby, is that what you'd say this is, when you have something that doesn't have such a binding impact on the industry, but rather just a really strong speech? Is that all this is?
Well, first of all, yeah, I would agree with John that it seems the White House has finally figured out it's an election year and that there is no more juice to squeeze out of the progressive left. Might as well start trying to tack towards the voters that may not have believed they could vote for a second Trump term. Well, let's just try Joe Biden, and China is a winning issue. But the problem is not only is it a gun aimed at pretty much nothing, it also puts tariffs down on things that we don't have a supply chain in place to replace, and in the immediate run with these immediate tariffs will push up the cost of already expensive electric vehicles, which is a huge hurdle for the automakers to try and pull down the cost.
So solar cells, batteries, computer chips, even steel and aluminum, these are things where the prices will go up if they're coming from China. John, what do you do with that? I mean, this is a balancing act and a math equation here. You don't want it to cost more, but you still want to make a statement.
Well, it's more than just a statement. I mean, some of these things touch on national security issues. There's other things where we've seen China literally gut manufacturing communities in the United States with its mercantilist approaches to trade, i.e., I win, you lose. And so I, am a free trader, but if the other team isn't, or the other side isn't playing by free trade rules, you got to play hardball just as they play hardball with us. They've got tariffs on American-made cars.
And so the war does continue, so to speak, between the tariffs. Charlie, if you're China, do you retaliate? Do you evade these? What do you do?
You probably do retaliate. Sure, absolutely. I think they would be upset. But listen, this is an election year. And listen, it is a political good thing in the United States to be against China. We can't even get TikTok into here. And that because of China. I don't know if TikTok's invading my space, but nevertheless, I think we already got it did away with TikTok. Bottom line here, listen, I look at the car issue here is can the Americans make a good product that's cheap, and if they're going to compete with China, I don't think any Chinese cars are going to come into the United States. But China's making cars, correct me if I'm wrong, for $12,000 bucks.
Well,
$12,000, and the Americans can't do it. Why not?
Okay, so let's focus in on that because that's an important part of this conversation. The Seagull is the impetus of all of this. That's the name of the car that essentially costs about $12,000 in China. It would cost a little bit more here in the U.S., but for less range, you can get one for close to $10,000. You can't touch an electric car, John, in America for anywhere close to that, right?
No, nowhere near that. In fact, look, I don't want to blame the UAW for this, but, labor costs alone make it prohibitive to make an inexpensive car like that in the United States. And I'm not just saying it's that. China's got an amazing supply chain right now. And these guys are good. I mean, 5-6 years ago, the Chinese were coming to the West looking for ideas and talent. Now it's completely flipped. They've got better technology. They're getting to the market faster than our guys are. And that's something that management at all the legacy automakers, not just here in Detroit, are going to have to deal with.
But even if we put a 100% tariff on these Chinese-made cars, it's still cheaper than even the Buick Envision, which is made in China.
That's true.
That's an issue.
But the point is that, as usual, the Biden White House has found a problem and then aimed the gun in the wrong direction. The problem isn't that you become you start this protectionist precedent where you have to totally disrupt the existing supply chains that build the American-made vehicles. The problem is that we simply do not have the full, we don't have the full economic infrastructure and manufacturing infrastructure in place to build electric vehicles, and instead we're not being defensive enough about the about the domestic economic incursion of Chinese companies on U.S. soil that sort of walk around these little tariffs. I mean, see Goshen up in northern Michigan for more details.
Okay, but today, Governor Whitmer was at a ribbon cutting today for a company that cut the ribbon today to open more charging stations, to create more charging station infrastructure in the state of Michigan. This governor also, I understand what you're saying, Goshen is a Chinese company with a Chinese headquarters, but is trying to open up American facilities. Is she on the right track?
With electrical charging centers, sure. I mean, great. Go to a ribbon cutting. If private companies want to build them all you want.
But that's important. We need charging stations.
Right, but that's not the heart of the issue. Like, the heart of these tariffs is that you can't even build the vehicles without tremendously expensive product. Like, one of the tariffs that goes in immediately is on graphite. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but 1/3 of an electric vehicle's weight is in graphite. We have less than 1% of the world's graphite here in the United States. If you're not buying it from China, where are you?
Well, look, things are changing very quickly, and we're putting the capability in place to make all this stuff, mainly in the United States or even with our allies. General Motors is coming out with the Chevrolet Equinox. They just announced it this week. When you look at the base price of the model that's coming out later this year, add the rebate that you can get, it's going to be $27,000. That's very affordable. That's a game changer in this market. Most of everything that's in that car is not made in China.
Is that an electric car?
It's electric. Exactly right. Now, they're not launching at that price. They're launching
You think people will buy it?
I do. I absolutely do. Look, electric cars, it's going to be slow, but every year we're going to sell more and more of them.
So how do you balance, though, Abby, something like the interests of the U.S. against the Chinese government and what the Chinese is trying to perhaps dump onto us, and the environment? Because today I talked to Mike Rogers and said, look, you can't pretend like this isn't a Republican-Democrat issue. Protecting the environment is important. Why is that a political issue? It shouldn't be. So what do you do to move forward with less carbon emissions and kind of getting more into the electric game?
Well, I think you first have to buy the premise that the whole manufacturing process of an electric vehicle and then generating the electricity is somehow more carbon neutral than the process.
But it is. It is more carbon neutral
absolutely
than
a debatable point.
No, it's not debatable. It's absolutely provable. You're right. EVs cause a tremendous amount of carbon pollution in the manufacturing. But after you drive the average EV about 25,000 miles, it matches what a gasoline car is. And from there on out, the EV is a clear winner.
And the battery life afterwards, there are facilities that are now being created right here at home to recycle the battery or to repurpose those batteries so that it's not just dumped and causing more harm.
Right down the road here in Wixom is a battery recycling center.
So when you look at all that infrastructure in place to take care of these EVs and the afterlife of an EV, isn't that the way to go?
Well, and I would also say that a lot of the renewable aspect of the energy generation that goes into charging is premised on the idea that you can go all renewable, which we know is not true because the Northeastern operator TPMC has already paused the adding of renewable sources of energy to its grid because it can't, those renewable sources can't provide the reliability it takes to sustain.
But we have to get better though, right? We
do have to get better, but I guess like to your essential question is, sure, switch to electric vehicles. If that's where the market goes, if that's where the interests of this country go, great. But the part of this problem is artificially created by the demand to go all electric.
Charlie, is the problem that the demand isn't there because the price point isn't there, or is it a convenience thing?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think price is a big factor. I think if we asked some people later on in here about, would you buy a car for $12,000? And then people said yes. They find out it's from China. They say, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. I think there's a scare thing going on here with our government here, scaring people about China. The bottom line here, though, is that the initial question is cost is a big deal, and people can't afford the cars these days. They can't get used cars. It's a real problem for real Americans, average Americans. They cannot buy cars. That's a problem.
And so when you look at a soccer mom, we talked to one of our guests earlier who said, look, this isn't just about cost. Let's say there's a family of four, they can't afford an EV, John, and they turn around and they say, all right, so now this mom or dad says they're going to truck their kids away from hockey practice to here to there. Now they got to go find an EV charging station in between the tightest schedule that anybody could ever balance. And isn't that unreasonable?
It is for a lot of people. Look, I've said this all along. EVs are perfect for a lot of people. They're not perfect for everybody.
So then why are they being mandated for everyone? I think that is the problem that the Biden administration is desperately trying to walk around.
I would agree with you that I think they're trying to push too much too fast. However, there is a majority of people in the United States who believe that climate change is a problem, that weather is getting more and more extreme. It's affecting them. They want something done. It was Congress that mandated that this happen.
Abby, is 6 years too soon, 2030?
Absolutely. I mean, I drive around my corner of Ingham County. Sorry, Detroit viewers. Drive around my corner of Ingham County, and I see 0 electric cars in a week.
Well, and listen, and things are different. In one state, you can see where people like them, where people don't. Let's talk for a moment before we go to break here, what these tariffs will end up doing for the political cycle here. Donald Trump had these tariffs in place. Joe Biden actually strengthened them. Isn't that a very kind of Republican move, wouldn't you say, Abby?
Okay, well, first of all, tariffs are a dial, not a switch. And I think that Joe Biden, where he has gone horribly wrong here, is he has taken the dial and cranked it all the way one direction.
But Donald Trump says he should do more.
Trump said he should have done it earlier.
That can be.
That's why I said this is
Donald Trump's position, but
politics. It's politics in an election year. Who are we trying to kid? Who can be tougher on China?
Well, right.
Sounds like Biden's got a one-up right now. Let's see.
Well, the two of them plan on 2 different debates already, and perhaps a third one as well, in which this will definitely be an issue. And it's an issue here tonight, of course, in the Motor City, where we make cars and rely on them, and we want to drive them, and we want to have the convenience and yet the balance of the environment. So we're going to be back in a moment with final thoughts, and Charlie's taking Let It Rip on the road.
Do you think Americans would buy a car for $12,000, but the car's made in China?
No. 12,000? Yeah, why not? Is it broke down?
No, but it is made in China.
Yeah, I'd rather buy U.S.
These parts are already in China. You lift up a car to say made in America, not like it used to be.
They cost $12,000, and they seem to be pretty good cars. Would you buy one?
I don't think I would.
Electric car. If it was, no electric?
No electric.
Some people don't like China, and they say, we're not buying it just because it's from China.
And that shouldn't be a thing, because most of the things that everybody buys inherently comes from China.
Should American companies be able to make cars that are cheaper?
I think so. They just need the materials to do it.
I'd rather buy U.S.
$12,000?
Compared to 40, yeah, that would be tough, especially for someone like myself.
All right, the tariffs are meant to bolster the U.S. jobs and manufacturing in the U.S. John McElroy, will it work?
Boy, that's hard to say. Look, there's no Chinese car company selling electric cars here, as I mentioned earlier, except for Polestar. So it's really not going to have very much of an impact right now.
Abby, will it work? Bolster U.S. jobs and manufacturing with tariffs?
I think that question is sort of beside the point since it hasn't arrived yet, but I do think that this country has not done enough to protect its economy from China bringing its operations here to the United States.
Charlie.
Not going to work, I don't think, but you got to have American companies that make a cheaper car that middle America can buy.
Tariffs, by the way, go into effect, and when they do, it takes a few years for them to go into full effect, coming into effect, I think, by 2026. An interesting one, and one that we'll keep our eyes on. That does it for this edition of Let It Rip.